I had been planning this solo hiking trip for weeks, a remote trail in the mountains, far from the noise of the city, where I could disconnect from everything and just be alone in the wilderness. It was supposed to be peaceful, a challenge, sure, but nothing I couldn't handle. I'd hiked harder trails before. This was just another weekend in the woods. The trail was barely marked, but I'd done my research. I had maps, a GPS, a fully stocked backpack. I knew the risks. The area was isolated, no cell service, no nearby towns, but that was part of the appeal. I wanted silence, just me and nature. The first few miles were easy. The air was crisp, the scent of pine thick in the wind. I kept a steady pace, listening to my boots crunch against the dirt. The forest was dense, but the trail was clear enough. No signs of other hikers, which wasn't surprising. It wasn't a popular trail. That was why I picked it. By midday, I had covered a good distance. The sun was high, but the trees kept me in the shade. I stopped for a quick lunch, a protein bar and some jerky, before pushing forward. My goal was to reach a small clearing by a river before sunset. It was about 10 miles in, an ideal spot to set up camp. At around the 7th mile, something changed. The trail grew narrower. The trees pressed in closer. The air felt different, heavy, still. I figured I was just getting into a more secluded part of the forest. No big deal. But then I started noticing things. Little things. A rusted canteen, half buried in the dirt. A torn piece of fabric snagged on a branch. Faded footprints leading off the trail into the trees. Old signs that someone had been here before, but not recently. The forest was reclaiming whatever they left behind. I kept moving. My pack felt heavier. The air felt thicker. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just tired, but the feeling wouldn't shake. Something about this stretch of the trail felt wrong. Then I saw it. A backpack, just sitting in the middle of the trail. It looked old, sun-bleached, partially covered in dirt. I stopped, looked around, listened. Nothing but the wind through the trees. I stepped closer, nudged it with my foot. It was empty. No food, no gear, just an abandoned bag. Something about it made my skin crawl. I should have turned around then. I should have trusted my gut. But I was too far in, too stubborn. I kept going. The trail got worse. Overgrown, barely visible, like no one had walked it in years. I checked my GPS. The river was close, maybe a mile away. I told myself it was just an old section of the trail, that the backpack had been left behind by some forgetful hiker, that there was nothing to worry about. Then the smell hit me. It was faint at first, like something rotting, like an animal carcass left too long in the sun. I tried to ignore it, but it got stronger, thicker. It made my stomach turn. I didn't want to see what was causing it, but my eyes were already scanning the trees. And then I saw them. Bones. Not scattered. Not left behind by scavengers. Arranged. Neatly. Deliberately. A small pile of them, stacked together in a clearing just off the trail. At first, I thought they were from an animal. Maybe deer bones. But as I stepped closer, I saw they were too long, too thin. I turned back to the trail, my heart pounding. This wasn't right. None of this was right. I needed to leave. Now, I turned to head back the way I came, but something caught my eye. Further up the trail, barely visible through the trees, another pile of bones. And another. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my GPS. I just needed to follow my path back, get to my car, get out of here. I could call the authorities once I had service again. But when I checked my screen, my route was gone. Just a blank map. The GPS was still on, still tracking, but it wasn't showing anything. I swallowed the panic rising in my throat and tried to stay calm. I knew the way back. I had walked it hours ago. I could retrace my steps. I could get out. But as I turned, I saw something that made my breath stop. Footprints. Not mine. Fresh. Leading towards me. I didn't think. I ran. Branches whipped against my face. The undergrowth clawed at my legs. I didn't care. I just ran. I didn't know if I was going the right way. I just knew I had to get out. The smell was everywhere now. Thick, choking. My head was spinning. My legs burned. Couldn't stop. Then I saw it, my own boot print in the dirt. My trail. I was back on it. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. I just kept going. Felt like hours before I finally saw my car. I nearly collapsed when I reached it, my hands fumbling for the keys. When I finally got inside, I locked the doors, started the engine, and peeled out of there so fast my tires kicked up dirt. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, until my GPS started working again, until I had cell service and could call someone. The authorities searched the area. They found the bones. Human, old, some decades old, some not as old. They never found who left them there, never figured out what had happened. They called it an unsolved case, another mystery in the woods. But I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and I know I'm never going back. The trail was supposed to be easy, nothing crazy, just a simple overnight hike through the woods, following a well-marked path to a ridge with a perfect view of the valley below. The weather was good, and I'd packed light but smart. Enough food, water, and the right gear to keep myself comfortable. The plan was to get up there, set up camp, and wake up early to watch the sunrise before heading back down. It started off well enough. The first few miles were peaceful. The woods quiet except for the occasional rustle of animals in the underbrush and the sound of my own footsteps on the dirt path. I didn't see many people, just a couple heading back down, nodding at me as they passed. They looked tired but happy. That was a good sign. The trees were tall, thick with leaves, filtering the sunlight into shifting patterns on the ground. The air smelled fresh, a mix of pine and damp earth. Birds chirped high in the branches, unseen but always present. It was the kind of hike that felt good, like something natural, something simple. About 4 miles in, I reached the first sign that something was off. It was subtle, just a feeling, really. The woods got quieter. The usual sounds of birds and distant rustling faded, replaced by an odd stillness. I paused, listening, but there was nothing. No wind, no movement, just silence. I shook it off and kept going. Maybe the animals had picked up on my presence and gone still. Maybe it was nothing. But as I walked, the feeling stayed with me, growing heavier with each step. The trail started to climb, switchbacking up the side of the ridge. The trees thinned, and I caught glimpses of the valley below. The view was incredible. Rolling hills stretching out under a sky that was starting to take on the warm hues of the setting sun. I stopped to take a few pictures, but the unease hadn't left me. Then I saw the footprints. They weren't mine. They were fresh, pressed into the soft dirt of the trail. At first, I thought maybe they belonged to the couple I'd seen earlier, but as I looked closer, something felt wrong. They were spaced unevenly, like whoever made them was moving strangely, almost staggering. And they were deep, like the person was either carrying something heavy or limping. I glanced around, suddenly aware of how alone I was. The silence pressed in harder. My stomach twisted. I told myself it was just my imagination, just my mind playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I picked up my pace, pushing forward. The last stretch to the ridge was steep, but I didn't stop. I wanted to get to my campsite, to get my tent up, to feel some sense of security. When I reached the top, the sun was low, casting long shadows across the clearing. I found a good spot near a cluster of trees, set up my tent, and started a small fire. The warmth and light helped a little. I made dinner, forced myself to eat even though my stomach was still tight with unease. Then I saw them. More footprints. These were closer, circling around the edge of my campsite. The dirt was disturbed, as if someone had been standing there for a while, just watching. I stood up, heart hammering, scanning the trees. There was nothing, just the darkness beyond the firelight. I told myself they must have been old. Maybe they'd been there before I arrived. Maybe I just missed them earlier. But I didn't believe that. I barely slept. Every sound made me sit up, listening, waiting. But nothing happened. No movement. No figures in the dark. Just silence. Morning came, cold and gray. I packed up fast, eager to get out of there. The trail down felt different. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, following me. But the trail was empty. Then I found the knife. It was lying in the dirt, right in the middle of the path. A hunting knife, blade half buried in the ground like someone had dropped it or left it there. I stared at it, a cold wave rolling through me. The footprints around it were fresh, leading off into the trees. I didn't stop to think. I didn't stop at all. I ran, my pack slamming against my back, breath coming in ragged gasps. I ran until my legs burned, until the fear in my chest drowned out everything else. I didn't look back, not once. When I finally made it to my car, I threw my gear inside and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. The whole way home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing on the side of the road, watching me leave. I never found out who was out there. I never went back, and I never will. I woke up before dawn, my gear packed the night before. The plan was simple: a solo hike through the dense woods of the Pacific Northwest, a place I'd explored a few times before but never alone. I wanted the isolation, the challenge of relying on my own instincts. I needed the break from work, the city, the endless noise. Just me and the trail, nothing else. The air was crisp, the kind that cut through your jacket and sent chills down your spine. The parking lot was empty, just as I'd hoped. I locked my car, slung my pack over my shoulders, and took my first steps into the woods. The first few miles were easy, well-maintained trails winding through towering pines. The ground was damp, soft from recent rain. The only sounds were the rhythmic crunch of my boots and the distant call of a bird. As I ventured deeper, the trail grew narrower. The trees thickened, their branches interlocking overhead, blocking out more of the sky. I liked it that way. There was something comforting about being surrounded by nothing but nature. I hiked for hours, stopping only to sip water and check my map. My goal was a secluded clearing near a river, a perfect spot to set up camp. But something felt off. It wasn't fear, not yet, but an unease I couldn't shake. The silence felt unnatural. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I brushed it off as paranoia. Being alone in the wilderness played tricks on your mind, made you aware of things you'd never notice in a group. I focused on my steps, kept moving. It was around midday when I realized I hadn't seen any wildlife. No birds fluttering through the branches, no squirrels scurrying across the ground, not even an insect buzzing in my ear, just silence. The further I walked, the heavier the air became, like I was wading through something unseen. Then I noticed the footprints. At first, I thought they were mine, but they were too big, too deep. Someone had walked this trail before me. Recently, I squatted down, studying them. The edges were crisp, undisturbed by wind or rain. My stomach tightened. I wasn't alone. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe another hiker had passed through earlier that morning. Maybe a hunter. But the rational part of my brain couldn't ignore one thing. The prints were heading in the same direction as mine. And they weren't spaced apart like normal walking strides. They were erratic, uneven, like whoever left them had been running. A low ache started in my gut. Something primal. Something my ancestors must have felt when they sensed danger. I straightened up and picked up my pace, suddenly hyper-aware of every sound, every rustling leaf. My skin felt too tight, my breathing too loud. Then I saw it. A piece of cloth, tangled in the underbrush. Dark, almost blending into the forest floor. I knelt, reaching for it. It was damp, torn. A jacket, maybe. I scanned the area, searching for any other signs of life. But the woods stretched in every direction. Empty. Just trees and shadows. I kept moving, faster now. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was jumping to conclusions. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong. I reached the clearing by late afternoon. The river was exactly where the map said it would be, its surface smooth and glassy, reflecting the overcast sky. I dropped my pack, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I was here. I was safe, or so I thought. I set up my tent, built a small fire. The warmth helped, but that gnawing unease never left. The footprints, the cloth, the silence. It was all circling in my head, a whisper of something I wasn't ready to name. Night fell quickly. I ate a protein bar, listened to the distant rush of water. The fire crackled, its glow barely pushing back the darkness. I tried to relax, but every creak of a branch sent my heart hammering. My instincts were screaming at me, but I had no real reason to panic. Nothing had happened, yet I crawled into my tent, zipping it shut. The fabric felt too thin, too flimsy, but exhaustion won. My eyes closed. Somewhere in the middle of the night, I woke up. Something was outside my tent. Not an animal, not the wind, something breathing. My pulse pounded in my ears. I held my breath, straining to listen. The sound was faint, just beyond the fabric. Slow, measured breaths, not mine. I stayed still, every muscle locked. Then the breathing stopped. Silence. I didn't move. Minutes passed, stretching into eternity. My mind screamed at me to do something. Grab my knife, bolt from the tent, but I was frozen. Then, footsteps. Soft, careful, moving away. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore. Then, with shaking hands, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The fire had burned low, casting weak light across the clearing. Nothing, no movement, but my gut told me whoever, whatever, had been there wasn't far. I couldn't stay. I knew that now. Staying until morning wasn't an option. I packed in record time, dousing the fire, shoving my gear into my pack with shaking hands. I didn't care about noise anymore. I just needed to go. The hike back was a blur. Every shadow felt like eyes watching me. Every snapped twig a sign that something was following. I pushed forward, ignoring the burning in my legs, the ache in my lungs. I just had to reach the car. When I finally saw the parking lot through the trees, relief nearly brought me to my knees. My car was there, untouched. I fumbled for my keys, hands trembling so hard I dropped them. I didn't look back, not once. I drove until I was miles away, not stopping until I reached a gas station on the edge of town. Only then did I breathe, really breathe. I never went back, never found out who or what had been out there with me. But sometimes, late at night, I think about those footprints, about the breathing outside my tent. And I wonder, how close had they been? Really? And what would have happened if I hadn't woken up? I had been hiking for years, so when I decided to do a solo trek through the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, I didn't think much of it. I had my gear, my map, my water, and my food. I had checked the weather and made sure I told a friend my planned route. Everything seemed set. The plan was to hike out about 15 miles to a spot that was supposedly untouched by most hikers. A small clearing near a creek, camp there for the night, and then make my way back the next day. It was a perfect plan, simple and safe. The first few miles were easy. The sun was out, though covered by thick tree branches. The trail was a bit overgrown in places, but it was still manageable. I took my time, stopping to take in the smell of the trees, the sound of the birds, and the gentle rustling of the wind through the branches. It was peaceful. I felt at home. Around mile 7, the trail became rougher. The dirt turned into loose rocks, and I had to slow down to avoid twisting my ankle. There were signs of recent rain, mud puddles, damp leaves, and the occasional fallen branch. Still, nothing out of the ordinary. I kept moving forward, checking my map every so often to make sure I was on the right track. At mile 10, I saw the first sign that something was off. A fallen tree lay across the path, but the way it had fallen seemed unnatural. Trees fall in storms all the time, but this one looked like it had been pushed over. The roots were torn from the ground, but there was no sign of rotting. It was fresh. I had to climb over it, which wasn't too difficult, but as I did, I noticed something strange. The forest was quiet, too quiet. The birds had stopped chirping, the rustling leaves had stilled, and even the usual background noise of insects had disappeared. It was just my breathing and the sound of my footsteps. I tried to shake it off as I kept moving. Maybe I had just startled the wildlife. It wasn't uncommon for things to go silent when a large animal was nearby. Maybe a bear was in the area. I gripped my bear spray a little tighter and picked up the pace. By mile 12, I felt a growing unease. I kept looking over my shoulder, though I never saw anything. It was the kind of feeling you get when you're being watched. I knew it was probably just my nerves, but I couldn't shake it. Every now and then, I would stop and listen, expecting to hear footsteps behind me, but there was nothing. At mile 14, I reached the creek. The water was clear and moving swiftly. I knelt to refill my water bottle, watching the way the sun reflected off the surface. Then I noticed something upstream, a ripped piece of fabric caught on a branch. It was dark, possibly from a jacket or backpack. It looked weathered, but it was definitely man-made. I stood up and scanned the area, but I didn't see any signs of a campsite or another hiker. I decided to leave it alone and continue on. I reached my campsite just before sunset. The clearing was perfect. Flat ground, plenty of space for my tent, and the creek nearby for water. I set up my tent, started a small fire, and ate my dinner. As the sun dipped below the trees, the feeling of being watched returned. I scanned the tree line, my headlamp cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing, just trees and shadows. I told myself I was being paranoid and forced myself to relax. I crawled into my tent, zipped up the door, and lay back. The sounds of the forest had returned, which gave me some comfort. I listened to the wind and the occasional owl hoot, letting it lull me to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. Something wasn't right. It wasn't a noise that woke me. It was the absence of noise. The forest was silent again. I turned onto my side and listened, my body tense. Then I heard it. Footsteps, not an animal. Animals move in irregular patterns, rustling, stopping, starting again. This was different. These footsteps were slow, deliberate, careful. Someone was walking near my campsite. I held my breath, my heart hammering in my chest. My knife was in my pack, just out of reach. My bear spray was next to me. I quietly reached for it, keeping my ears trained on the sound outside. The footsteps stopped. I waited. Minutes passed. Nothing. My body screamed at me to check outside, but my instincts told me to stay put. I lay there, unmoving, gripping the bear spray so tightly my fingers ached. Then, finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sounds of the forest returned. Crickets, the wind, the rustling leaves. Whatever had been there was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I packed up my gear as fast as I could and started heading back. I moved quickly, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. The feeling of being watched never left me. By mile 8, I found something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. Human footprints. But they weren't mine. They were fresh, heading in the same direction I was going, back toward the trailhead. I pushed forward, my legs burning, my chest tight. I just needed to get back to my car. Every shadow in the trees felt like a person. Every snapped twig sent my heart racing. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead. When I finally got to my car, I threw my pack in the back and locked the doors. I sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. As I turned on the engine and pulled onto the road, I couldn't shake the thought. Someone had been out there with me. Someone had been watching me. And if I hadn't woken up that night, what would have happened? I don't hike alone anymore.